Good afternoon, respected teachers and my dear colleagues. Thank you, Shanit, for your presentation. Without taking much time, let us move into a case scenario. We have a 18-year-old male patient resident of Delhi with no prior comorbidities, presented with fever for 2 weeks, with weight loss for same duration of around 10 kgs and some constitutional symptoms, and no localizing symptoms. On examination, there was no localizing signs available. He was investigated, in which ESR was found to be 110 mm per hour. Other imagings like chest X-ray and ultrasound were normal. Viral markers were negative. Chest CT was revealing of mediastinal lymphadenopathy, for the evaluation of which bronchoscopy was done. TBNA sample revealed Genexpert positive, which was sensitive for rifampicin. He was started on category 1 ATT with Benadone. However, patient comes back after a month with swelling in his right side of neck, which was progressively increasing in size since past 2 weeks. Also, fever had subsided only 4 to 5 days in between for that month. On examination, fluctuant swelling in the right supraclavicular area, which later ruptured to discharge pus. The sample was sent, which was positive for Genexpert and rifampicin sensitive. Thinking of resistant tuberculosis, liquid culture and line probe assay were done. Liquid culture was positive for Mycobacterium tuberculosis. Line probe assay revealed it was sensitive for isoniazid and rifampicin. So what is the diagnosis? According to the lab reports, it says it is a sensitive TB. However, patient is worsening clinically even after he is on ATT, for which ATT uptake assay was done, which was also within normal limits. So what could be the diagnosis? It is TB iris. So patient was treated with Visalone 40 mg OD in tapering dose along with ATT, and then he started improving, and now into 10 months of ATT, this is the picture of the patient, and he is currently in follow-up of ID clinic. So this leads us to the today's discussion topic, immunomodulation in infections. In today's topic, we will be discussing corticosteroids, extracorporeal therapies, anti-inflammatory therapy, antibodies, cytokines, and PD-1. Quickly looking at an infection, once a foreign bacteria or pathogen enters into our body, innate immune response occurs first with secretion of multiple cytokines. Simultaneously, bacteria are digested by the antigen presenting cells, which present the antigen to T cells. With activation of T cells and B cells, immune response of specific immunity starts, which finally leads to neutralization of the bacteria, opsonization, and phagocytosis of the bacteria. Simultaneously, inflammation occurs as a response to it for containing the bacterial infection. However, in exuberant inflammatory response, host damage also simultaneously occurs. So infection can have over-exuberant immune response or can also have immune compromised state. So immune modulators, if at all being used in infection, timing is the key factor. When there is exuberant immune response, immune suppressants are to be used, and when there is immune compromised state, immune stimulants might be useful. Coming to the first modality of this series, let's speak about corticosteroids. Corticosteroids have multiple mechanisms from which it acts on immune system. It inhibits majority of the immune cells. It inhibits Th1 response, Th2 response, Th17 response. In B cells, it reduces the antibody production. It increases their apoptosis. Also increases apoptosis of neutrophils. It promotes T regulatory cells and healing process. At low doses, it promotes macrophages, but at higher doses, it inhibits its activities. It also increases apoptosis in eosinophils and basophils. Currently, corticosteroids are used in quite a lot of infections with exuberant immune response, such as in acute bacterial meningitis, tubercular pericarditis, HIV-associated iris, PCP, enteric encephalopathy. Though it is rare, it is shown to be really effective in enteric encephalopathy. In lepromatous leprosy, to reduce the inflammation and damage to nerves, corticosteroids are used. In refractory septic shock, where shock is not responding to fluid therapy or vasopressors, steroids have been shown to be beneficial. Also in CNS infections, where antimicrobial drugs can cause inflammation due to dead organism, corticosteroids are helpful. Also in cytokine storm situations like macrophage activation syndrome. Most important point of discussion in corticosteroids when related to infectious disease is sepsis. There are no clear-cut guidelines saying whether it is helpful or whether it is not. One of the systematic reviews published in 2015 said there was no significant importance or significant improvement with use of steroids in sepsis. It had looked into 35 studies, none of which could actually prove the effectiveness of glucocorticoids. However, recently in 2018, NEJM published adrenal trial with the primary outcome of 90 days all-cause mortality among users of 200 mg hydrocortisone versus placebo in septic patients. This also did not show any significant benefit in mortality at 90 days. However, there was faster resolution of shock and shorter duration of initial episode of mechanical ventilation requirement in these patients. On the same year, another trial was published which showed there was significant reduction in mortality at 90 days among the septic patients receiving hydrocortisone plus fludrocortisone in comparison to placebo. So with these studies, BS medical practice guidelines suggest to use steroids in sepsis but with a lower evidence. This is the list of current guidelines which speak about corticosteroids in sepsis. All of them mention it is not to be used in sepsis. However, in septic shock, it is shown to be a favorable outcome. Coming to the next modality, extracorporeal therapies. Extracorporeal therapies mean treatment outside the body. Outside the body in the sense, blood of the patient is removed out or run through a circuit where the chemokines or endotoxins are removed out of the circulation and the purified blood is diverted back into the patient system. This is to create or restore the balance of immune response to infections. It removes triggers and cytokines, including endotoxins, pathogen-associated molecules, damage-associated molecular patterns, activated lymphocytes, cytokines. Also, sometimes directly pathogens can be removed through this. This works on basis of some theories such as iceberg theory, peak concentration theory, the cytokine theory. In all of which states cytokines are either responsible directly for the end organ damage, such as in iceberg theory it says cytokines are present in circulation because they have saturated the tissue levels. So if you remove them, end organ damage can be stopped. In peak concentration theory again states if we disrupt the peak concentration of cytokines, end organ damage can be stopped. In cytokinetic theory it says removing cytokines from the bloodstream creates a gradient which removes the cytokines in the peripheral inflammatory site, thus preventing the end organ damage. So what all modalities do we have for extracorporeal therapies? We have auxiliary membrane, we have cytosorb, we have high volume hemofiltration, coupled plasma filtration and adsorption, and many more. Coming to the first of which, most importantly, extracorporeal therapies, timing again is the key, as we spoke already. In immune response, initial phase will be of adaptive immunity, which is helpful for the host in creating a response to the inflammation and fighting against the bacteria. In this stage, if extracorporeal therapy is used, it will be harmful for the host. In this next phase, where there is exuberant immune response over and above what is required for killing the bacteria, extracorporeal therapies will be of helpful. After a certain point, this exuberant immune response reduces and regulatory mechanisms take upper hand, where they help in healing process. If extracorporeal therapy is used at this point, it will be harmful again. So again, to strike the balance, timing is the key. To look into first of this series of extracorporeal therapies, high volume hemofiltration. Let us understand this through the IVORY trial. This is nothing but hemofiltration, such as similar to continuous renal replacement therapy. However, here hemofiltration is done at a higher volume, that is at 70 ml per kg per hour. So in this IVORY trial, which was published in 2013, among finally analyzed 66 and 71 candidates in high volume hemofiltration versus standard volume, there was no significant difference between the groups for all-cause mortality at 28 days. They also had looked up at the secondary outcomes such as hospital stay, requirement of inotropes, and improvement in the renal failure. None of them showed any significant improvement. So this is the graph again depicting there was no difference in all-cause mortality at 28 days, not also at 60 or 90 days. Next extracorporeal therapy is cytosorb adsorption. Cytosorb absorption uses a cytokine adsorbing chamber in series with either continuous renal replacement therapy or with ECMO or with cardiopulmonary bypass mechanisms. This removes pro and anti-inflammatory cytokines including interleukin 6, TNF alpha, interleukin 1 beta, interleukin 4, interleukins 10, also a regulatory cytokine also removed. It removes the cytokines of size between 5 to 60 kilodiopters. It can also remove hemoglobin, bilirubin, myoglobin, enterotoxins, medications, and metals. How does this actually remove these cytokines? This chamber contains multiple micro beads of sorbents, polystyrene, and divinyl benzene polymers which have pores on their surfaces, totally creating a surface area of 40,000 meter squares. These pores will filter off the cytokines. So single cartridge of this can be used for maximum of 24 hours, after which it gets saturated, and if required it has to be replaced after which, and such therapy has to be repeatedly used over time so that the inflammatory mediators are removed from the circulation. The limiting factor is again cost, which is 90,000 per filter. These are the list of studies which have been published in favor or against cytosorb. Most of them had looked up at requirement of vasopressor, whether there was improvement in that or not, and reduction in interleukin levels such as interleukin 6, interleukin 1 beta, and 18 in comparison to a standard hemofiltration. Next modality will be coupled plasma filtration and adsorption. In this method, there is a plasma filter attached along with the continuous renal replacement therapy. Usually hemofiltration 440 devices are used for this. This separates plasma from blood before the filtration process, and then it filters out the cytokines through adsorption in the plasma. Filtered plasma is and then reverted back into the hemodialyzer and finally to the patient. Advantages is that this is more biocompatible and less hemolytic, as RBCs are not coming in direct contact with these sorbent membranes, and it also said to be having improved cytokine clearance. This requires continuous 10-hour sessions for at least 5 consecutive days to be effective. Next, coming to endotoxin removal. As we all know, endotoxins are the mediators of gram-negative bacteria, which causes host damage and exuberant immune response. Here, hydrophobic interaction and hydrogen bonding, van der Waals force, ionic bonding are all used for attaching endotoxin to sorbents. Most commonly used is polymyxins. Why polymyxins are used? Because polymyxin have an unusual ability to bind to and neutralize endotoxins. There have been trials over use of these polymyxin B filters. One of the best known example is Toramyxin, which is produced by Japanese company and has been used in Japan since decades. Cost of each would be around 60,000. Let's look into these trials of polymyxin. First trial was published in 2009 in JAMA, which showed a significant response and significant reduction in mortality among polymyxin B hemoperfused patients in comparison to conventional therapy. However, in the recent published 2018 article in JAMA, there was actually no significant response between the standard polymyxin B hemoperfusion or sham perfusion. Coming to endotoxin and cytokine removal, this includes removal of both cytokines as well as endotoxins. How does that work? This includes multiple membranes in which positively charged polyimine ethylene layer removes the endotoxins which are negatively charged. Polymers of sulfonate group and microporous structures, they absorb cytokines and hence both of them are removed. And also it has a heparin graft on the surface, on the luminal surface, which prevents the thrombogenicity while blood is passing through it. Comparing three different modalities of adsorption of cytokines and endotoxins, Toramyxin has been shown to be superior for adsorption of endotoxin. Oxaris has good adsorption for both endotoxin as well as cytokines, and Cytosorb has been shown to be better for adsorption of cytokines alone. Coming to the next immune inhibitory molecule, that is ulnastatin. This is a glycoprotein acid resistant multivalent serum protease inhibitor. This is derived from human urine and blood. This inhibits trypsin, chymotrypsin, thrombin, calicretin, neutrophil elastase, plasmin, cathepsin, and multiple coagulation factors. Being a protease inhibitor, it blunts the pro-inflammatory cytokine response. It downregulates stimulated arachidonic pathway so that plasma leaking also can be stopped through this. And it is a very cost-effective therapy where it costs only 55 rupees per vial containing 1 lakh international units of ulnastatin. Is it really effective? Regarding that, there was a study published in 2014 where ulnastatin was administered IV at a dose of 2 lakh international units 12th hourly for 5 days in patients with sepsis within 48 hours of onset of one or more organ failures, and it was compared with placebo. Among the outcomes, they had used modified intention to treat analysis where at least patients should have received 6 doses of the drug were included, and they found that at 28 days all-cause mortality was significantly lower in the group receiving ulnastatin, which was 7.3% in comparison to 20.3% in the placebo group. One more study was published recently in June 18, which also showed there was significant improvement in the patients treated with ulnastatin in comparison to standard of therapy. Coming to next modality, that is antibody therapies. Antibodies externally given have been known since quite long time. They are used for passive immunization. Polyclonal antibodies are produced either by immunizing animals or by immunizing humans, and rarely convalescent plasma, especially in the scenarios where the disease is rare, such as it's happening currently in this pandemic, COVID. Convalescent plasma has been shown to be effective as well. Challenges would be standardization of the collection procedure and safety of the plasma products. Supply and access is also a great challenging process. Hence, actually, monoclonal antibodies are replacing polyclonal antibodies slowly. Advantage of this polyclonal antibody therapy would be it would provide immediate immunity against a particular disease in hand. It is safe in comparison to vaccines, and it is easy to produce as well. The major limiting factor would be short-lived immunity in these patients. Currently, antibody preparations in use are for anthrax, botulism, cytomegalovirus, diphtheria, hepatitis A, B, C, measles, rabies. Even for Staphylococcus aureus, it has shown to be useful. This leads to the topic of monoclonal antibodies. As we all know, it is produced by hybridoma technique through mouse, including mouse antibodies. These were mouse antibodies. However, because of increased concern of antibodies produced against these monoclonal antibodies, now we are moving towards more of human antibodies produced either through transgenic mouse or single B cells. Monoclonal antibodies usually target toxins of bacteria, where they bound to toxins and cause antibody-antigen complex, and which are removed by finally reticuloendothelial system, or they go and bind to surface proteins, causing bacterial opsonization, and they also are produced against polysaccharides, which is helpful in capsulated organisms. Among virus, broadly neutralizing antibodies can be produced, or these can be produced against receptors of the host cells, and they can also be produced to detect virally infected cells and help in cytotoxic killing of these cells. So first such known monoclonal antibody approved for infectious cause is palivizumab, which was approved in 1998. This is a humanized monoclonal antibody which is produced against the fusion protein of RSV, respiratory syncytial virus, and thus it prevents fusion of respiratory syncytial virus with the human plasma membrane. This is indicated in for use in prevention of LRTI, severe LRTI in RSV susceptible children, such as those of having congenital heart disease or premature children. And side effects majorly that is looked into would be upper respiratory tract infections, otitis media, fever, rash, and GI side effects. Rarely, anaphylaxis has also been reported, mostly during the post-marketing surveillance. Next monoclonal antibody is raxibacumab. This is produced against the protective antigen of anthrax toxin. Where is this protective antigen coming into picture? This protective antigen is produced by anthrax toxin, which forms assembly so that this binds to lethal factor and edema factor, and finally gets internalized and causes edema and death of cells. With this raxibacumab monoclonal antibody, we can block the step of assembly of this protective antigen, and thus internalization of the these factors can be prevented. This has been indicated for prophylaxis and treatment of inhalational anthrax, and this has to be given with pre-medication of diphenhydramine. This was approved in 2012 by FDA. However, cost is again a major limiting factor with $5,100 per dose. Obeltoxaximab. This is also a monoclonal antibody against Bacillus anthracis, which acts through the same mechanism by binding to PA, that is protective antigen. This was approved in 2016. Moving to next monoclonal antibody, bezlotoxumab. It is a human monoclonal antibody against Clostridium difficile toxin B. It neutralizes the toxin B However, no effect on toxin A has been noted. It reduces the recurrent episodes of Clostridium difficile infection. It is to be used as a single dose of 10 mg per kg infused over 60 minutes. It should be used in conjunction with other antibiotic therapy. It cannot be a monotherapy for CDI. Adverse effects commonly noted are nausea, pyrexia, headache, and post-marketing reports of congestive heart failure have also been noted. This has been approved by FDA in 2016. Next is ibalizumab. This is a humanized monoclonal antibody against CD4 D2 domain. By binding to D2 domain, it disrupts the attachment of glycoprotein 120 to the CD4 molecule, and thus it inhibits the entry as well as post-attachment steps of HIV transmission. This is indicated for patients who are already heavily treated with antiretroviral drugs and multi-drug resistant HIV infection. Dosage would be 2000 mg loading dose followed by maintenance of 800 mg every 2 weekly. Caution word would be this could lead to IRIS. Again, it is a costly drug with 78,000 per pack. This was approved for use in March 2018. Leronlimab is again a monoclonal antibody against HIV. This acts by binding to CCR5 co-receptors and thus preventing entry of HIV into T cells. This would not be effective against CXCR4 tropic viruses. This has been shown to be also effective in metastatic cancer disease, graft versus host disease, autoimmune diseases, and non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, as CCR5 is a mediator in all of these diseases. This is a combination of monoclonal antibodies which has been tried for Ebola, REGN-EB3. This is in a upcoming way. With this article published in 2019 December in NEGM, which compared remdesivir and cocktail of this monoclonal antibodies, and it was seen that there was significant mortality reduction among the patients receiving this monoclonal antibodies. This has been considered as one of the breakthrough therapies. This binds to actually 3 distinct non-overlapping epitopes of the glycoprotein on Ebola. This is a list of monoclonal antibodies against bacterial pathogens. Mostly we can look at Staph aureus and Pseudomonas aeruginosa being studied under these studies, of which AR301 is a very promising candidate. Here is one of the articles which stated the safety of this molecule. Also in post-hoc analysis, it was seen that patients treated with this AR301 had lesser duration of ICU stay and ventilatory requirements. Coming to IVIG, as we know, IVIG has been modality of treatment for multiple autoimmune diseases. It is actually a blood product prepared from serum of between 1,000 to 15,000 donors per batch, and it acts through multiple mechanisms such as over T and B cells. It causes modulation of their function and antibody production. It neutralizes the bacterial pathogens and superantigens. It recruits the pathogens into the lymph nodes by binding to these pathogens. It helps in opsonization and phagocytosis. It also blocks cellular receptors on pathogens, especially CCR5 and CD4. This is the modality has especially been explained in treatment of HIV. At lower doses, it prevents infection, maintaining IgE levels, immunoglobulin levels. At higher doses, it is anti-inflammatory and immunomodulatory. This is the list of diseases, infectious diseases where IVIG has been shown to be effective. This includes toxic shock syndrome of Staphylococcus aureus, West Nile virus, Clostridium difficile infection, Salmonella typhi, polyneuropathy associated with Campylobacter jejuni. Also, we know in way of GBS associated with Campylobacter jejuni, enterovirus, pediatric HIV. It has actually been approved by FDA as well. Coming to other cytokines, particularly granulocyte stimulating factor. These are the cytokines required for maturation of the granulocytes. They enhance the granulopoiesis and shorten the maturation time. Well-known drugs of this category would be filgrastim, pegfilgrastim, and linograstim. As we can see in the diagram here, GM-CSF is required for common myeloid progenitor to turn into monomyeloblast, and in development of basophils, neutrophils, eosinophils, as well as monocytes. These are this granulocyte stimulating factor is mostly been indicated in neutropenic patients, particularly those of congenital neutropenia, cyclic neutropenia, idiopathic neutropenias, refractory, to reduce the refractory infections in these patients. It has also been tried in non-neutropenic patients, however, with not much of success. Coming to interferons, interferons are known to be antiviral mechanisms of cells. They act by activating tyrosine kinase, JAK-STAT pathways, where interferon response factors are produced, and they act on interferon response elements and increase the expression of the genes required for antiviral activity. Type 1 interferons include interferon alpha and beta, which are the major antiviral interferons. They have been currently used for HBV, HCV, condyloma acuminatum, and HIV-related Kaposi sarcoma. Interferon gamma has been tried in granulomatous, chronic granulomatous disease, and also in atypical mycobacterial infections, HIV-associated cryptococcal meningitis as well. Interferon lambda is a recent addition to the group, which is also shown to be having antiviral properties. Coming to interleukins, interleukin agonist and antagonist have been in use for multiple clinical indications, including malignancies. With the aspect of infectious disease, interleukin 1 receptor antagonist anakinra has been tried in sepsis, however it has been ineffective. Interleukin 2 recombinant form has been tried in treating of HIV patients, as it has been shown that impaired production of IL-2 is responsible for progression of HIV disease. However, RCTs have failed to show benefit of this. Major drawback is that interleukin 2 agonist or recombinant IL-2 also enhances the regulatory T cells, which inhibit the inflammatory effect, thus being harmful. Interleukin 7 acts similar to interleukin 2, however this does not have regulatory cell increase. This has been shown that in anecdotal studies it is efficacious in HIV population. Interleukin 6, this has been known in cytokine storms, especially in the times of COVID. We are seeing use of tocilizumab for reducing the cytokine storm. Previous to that, it has been used in rheumatoid arthritis, juvenile idiopathic arthritis, and Castleman disease. This is the list of different modalities for treating cytokine storm in conditions of sepsis. We have already discussed corticosteroids and hemofiltration. Other modalities to reduce cytokines would be TNF-alpha neutralizing antibodies, interleukin 17A neutralizing antibodies, interleukin 18, interleukin 10 neutralizing antibodies, and also we have discussed already GM-CSF. Coming to the next molecule, imiquimod. It is a imidazoquinone, a novel synthetic compound. This acts by binding to TLR receptors on cell surface and activating monocyte, macrophage, and dendritic cells. This is basically an immune stimulant. It increases the secretion of pro-inflammatory cytokines such as interferon alpha, tumor necrosis factor, interleukin 12. It is shown to be having antiviral properties and anti-tumor properties. This was approved for treatment of anogenital warts in 1997. Coming to PD-1, PD-1 is a inducible expression on immune cells such as CD4, CD8, and NK cells. It has been shown that this is expressed in response to TCR signaling cytokines such as interleukin 2, interleukin 7 and type 1 interferons. In studies, it has been noted that PD-1 overexpression is noted in immune paralysis state. Upon expression of PD-1, immune cells go into decreased proliferation and increased apoptosis. They show less production of interleukins. PD-1 pathway inhibitors are already in use, basically in treating cancers such as melanomas. Upon inhibition of PD-1 pathway, immune cells can be made to produce more cytokines. They can be showing more cytolytic functions and they can increase their proliferation. Currently, these PD-1 pathway inhibitors are being studied for treatment of chronic infections such as HIV, hepatitis B, HCV, H. pylori, toxoplasmosis, and also in immunoparalysis cases of sepsis. Therapeutic vaccines. Therapeutic vaccines are vaccination for treating a disease rather than preventing it. It is combination of immunotherapeutics principle as well as vaccination principle. So far, two of the well-known therapeutic vaccines include modified Vaccinia strain Ankara, which is a vectored vaccine, acts as antigen source and stimulates inflammation. This has been used and studied for treating chronic infections like HIV, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, and Mycobacterium tuberculosis. Mycobacterium indicus prani, the vaccine developed in India, has been successfully used in treating leprosy in ants and warts. So these are upcoming modalities of treatment as well. Other strategies for treating infections would be statins, which act as anti-inflammatory mechanisms, and mesenchymal stem cell therapy is a very new and upcoming modality for treating infections. And radiation therapy was used in pre-antibiotic era for immune suppression or immune stimulation at the local sites. So finally, take-home message would be phage therapy is providing added advantage over antibiotics of higher specificity and no resistance. Steroid is not always bad choice for infections. Sometimes it is needed, such as we saw in our first case of iris. Monoclonal antibodies, they are highly targeted therapies with minimal side effects. They are the game changers of future. Extracorporeal therapies are really promising for cytokine storms, but they are quite expensive. PD-1 inhibitors are being tried for chronic infections and immunoparalyzed states. Thank you.